get in my car, we're going. Where are we going? We go out the studio gate, and visualize, this is the man, it's Mr. Stonewall. We go outside the gate. The minute he's outside the gate, it's yatta, yatta, yatta. So for all those career years, I've spent endless hours riding around with Roger. He had a 56 Black Thunderbird, so we had a cool looking car. But he chattered endlessly. There was so many railroad stories that I knew nothing about railroads, but I knew a lot by the time Roger retired. But the funny thing was, but besides the fact, Don mentions about the social side, it turned out to be fun. If we were someplace, some other city, and Roger said, we're going to lunch, or we're going to dinner, and we go someplace, and then Roger would order his vodka gimlet. I learned that I need to drink martinis if I'm going to go with Roger Brogy. And he had this ability to understand the history of every city, the history of almost every machine, every railroad, and because he never stopped talking, he gave you the most wonderful education. And then when you come back to the studio, and I tell the guys in the shop, I says, you know, Roger's a chatterbox. And they look at me and he says, oh, no, he doesn't talk. You're wrong. But then I noticed an interesting thing as the years went by, which, you know, you don't understand until later years. Walt had a little handful of people, like he had Roger Brogy for mechanical stuff, Frank Millington for all the drapery and soft goods. You'd have like Admiral Joe Fowler for construction, Dick Irvine for all the architectural design. Now, this is a group of guys, they don't necessarily have to have meetings, they don't have to have memos. The Xerox machine hadn't been invented, there's no iPods, there's no email, there's no nothing. So guess what? You get to work all day. These guys... There was a trust that you would observe. And the curious thing was, these guys did not fight. They didn't talk very much, but each respected the other guy's expertise, because it was a variety of expertise. And if Walt suggested something and it wasn't going to work, and it was mechanical, Roger would say, no. Or if something was going to work, and Irvine would say, oh, yes, that's easy. These guys trusted without argument each other. Now stop and think of the time it saves to get something done with big decisions at a very high level, because you've got hundreds of people in all directions that have to do this work. To me, that was the gigantic clue of why White Enterprises moved so fast and got so much done in those days, because of this very simple management of which it all was around Walt. And Walt was in a position to have all these people that would give him the straight scoop every time, and nobody had to argue. I don't know how else to describe it, but that's the way it was. And Roger was right in the middle of that pack.
That's true. It was like they didn't have, a lot of times they didn't even have to talk. They just, what was the assignment? Good, I'm going to do it. I know how to do it, and I know who to assign to it. But Alice, he was not interested in anything we did yesterday. He was only interested in what we were doing now and what we were going to do tomorrow, because that's where he was going to be. And what a way to work for somebody to tell you, I don't care what you did yesterday, just tell me where you're going, what new we're going to invent, what new projects we're going to do. What a way to work. Boy. So we all had to reinvent ourselves, I think, and reinvent our relationships with other people. And a lot of people never could adjust to that because they got their direction from Walt and they got it from nowhere else. I think the studio lost some really terrific people because they weren't called on as much. Bob and Dick Sherman are good examples of that. After a while, for some reason, a lot of people at the studio, maybe they were resented because Walt loved them so much, but I think the studio lost a lot because they weren't utilized like they were before. Anybody else relate to that? It's that thing, Bob, that we started to talk about you never said no to Walt, you know. And I think that was a driving force for all of us, even if you didn't know how to do it. you would never say it because if somebody else would get the assignment.
Well,
Mark was terribly touched by the lawsuit of Walt. And it took him a number of months to get back into the saddle, so to speak, because it wasn't so much of what would Walt ask you to do or what would Walt think of what you were doing. It was the fact that in many ways you worked and did a job because you wanted to please Walt, and Walt wasn't there to please. And it left a big hollow spot in your gut.
Well, I had a little bit different view. You got to remember, Walt would sometimes go away for maybe a month at a time, go to Europe, take his wife, go someplace. So there'd be periods of time where Walt just wasn't around. At the same time, because we had this train of activity in all different directions, particularly as Marty mentioned over at WED, that in your course of your normal day, whether you're working by yourself or you're working with 2 or 3 people, you're making these micro decisions, sometimes several a minute. You're doing this, you're doing this. Okay, there's 3 or 4 ways to do this. Is this good, that good? Oh, this is the one that'll work the best. So in other words, you just keep striking out in all these directions almost in an automatic mode. But in the back of your mind, as you come to a question in a matter of a few seconds, 3 ways to do it, instantly you know which was the best idea, which was finally going to work. And it was kind of a reflection of what would Walt want, but we didn't really ask the question. It's like you automatically knew. This meant we had a sort of an energy and a trajectory that ran, at least in my opinion looking back, it ran as far as 1972. Which is quite a few years after Walt's death before we kind of started to slow down because we kind of finished the paths we were on. But a lot of people had this automatic knowledge of choices in your standard day, evolving things up to having a project completed. Does that make a little bit of sense to you? That there was this continuity that was sort of in place, that it was like, well, Walt just took off on a long vacation and he wasn't coming back.
Another question? Yeah, go ahead. Tell us who you are and where you're from.
Michael from Celebration, Florida. Understanding that none of you work for WED right now, if you were working for the company today with the new Marvel comic brand becoming part of Disney, what would be an idea of how you would incorporate that brand into the existing parks and resorts?
That's a big one. Well, I think the first thing, because I asked the question to several people already, and they said, we don't know yet what characters we have and how we can use it. They have to go through all the legal stuff, because some of them, like Spider-Man, I think is already promised or used by, who is it, Warner's or Sony? So there's a lot of legal stuff before they can actually use it. But maybe somebody has an idea. Any of the characters that particularly strike you as something that you would like to work on for the parks?
I think it's something you have to study and check them all out and see what their background is before you start to do anything. Because if you don't know what you're working with, you can get in big trouble.
Sure. X, any of the Marvel characters that strike you as something that you'd like to work with in the park?
I think, did you ask me?
No, X.
Oh.
I don't know.
There's not an answer.
I like to do crazy costumes for women to match with the gents.
There you are. Costume, yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of learning that has to go on, a lot of understanding of what the company actually bought and can use. And that'll take a while, definitely take a while. And, you know,